going on, everybody? Eliot here from NovaCare Complex. First real day of practice, in my opinion, here with Matt Lombardo as always. And doesn't it really feel like today was the actual start of camp? I mean, I know we've said a bunch of times, lots of firsts, but today, to me, really felt like the start of camp.
Absolutely, Eliot. We had the 3 days of rookies and selected veterans. We had the light 10-10-10 practice yesterday where not a whole lot that you could glean from practice. And then Friday, the fans show up. All of the veterans are here. It was the first full practice. And you're right, it's the first day that it actually felt like training camp.
And probably one of the other reasons it felt like training camp was because we've, as with this team always, we have a little bit of drama now. So, all right, before we get into what happened today, the news, and, of course, the soap opera that is this team, let me take care of a few things. So if you're listening to us in a browser, you really shouldn't be. You should subscribe. This way you get the audio quicker. You get the podcast quicker. We're going to be doing these 3 times a week. So if you want your training camp news, this is the place to get it. The place you can subscribe. You can get it on iTunes. You can get it on Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spreaker. And, of course, once you subscribe, we love those reviews. 5 stars. Leave a little comment. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know who you want to have on. I mean, we want to have a lot of guests this year. So if you leave a comment and you request somebody, we'll do everything we can to get them. All right, now that that's out of the way, the drama of the day. Matt, why don't you fill the people in a little bit?
Yeah, Eliot, yesterday you had a one-on-one with Mychal Kendricks and basically talked to him about his situation, and it's really been ongoing with him given the status of his contract, the fact that he was basically on the slow ride to being benched last year, went from, consistent starter the first 2 years of his career to a reserve linebacker last year, and that seems to be the case again this year. And today at his locker, Kendricks just completely opened up and said, quote, "I asked for a trade for sure. Their response was, you're young and you're talented and we're not into that. I took it like that," unquote. That's Mychal Kendricks.
Yeah, and the interesting part about that is today is, today's camp. Camp's already getting me. Today is Friday, so I talked to Kendricks on Thursday, and he said, I knew the team was open to trading me. They didn't contact me about it, so it doesn't sound like this was a back and forth thing that happened with Kendricks and the Eagles. And the feeling I got from talking to Kendricks yesterday was, does he want to be here? No, he wants to be somewhere he can play. I mean, when he signed that big deal in 2015, a deal that really came out of nowhere. I mean, if I remember correctly, they signed it maybe a week into training camp or sometime during training camp.
One of the first deals that Chip Kelly actually executed with full control.
Right, exactly. So which is a weird timing for an extension during training camp. But yeah, he signs that big deal, and then he goes on that season to play he plays around 55% of the snaps that year. Granted, the Eagles were in a 3-4 defense then, which helped. Last year, Chip's gone, new defensive coordinator, Jim Schwartz comes in, and Kendrick plays around 25% of the snaps. So the question is, and I'll throw this to you, I think we can both agree part of the reason Kendricks isn't playing as much is because they're now running a 4-3, and even though it's a 4-3, they really only put 2 linebackers on the field a lot of the times.
Yep, he's basically relegated to the 3rd linebacker behind Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradham. And last year, even though he signed that big deal in 2015, think back to this time last summer, Eliot, and I wrote about this and did a video on the site Friday afternoon, that we can think back to a year ago when he was coming off the injury, and he played into the 4th quarter of that final preseason game against the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah.
Then the story came out in the Philadelphia Daily News that he took some shots at former defensive coordinator Billy Davis. Billy Davis took some shots at him. Not that great of a situation for a couple of days. And then the 4th preseason game, the game that's basically for veterans to have the night off and you're trying to evaluate your bottom of the roster players, they played Kendricks.
Yeah.
And he had every opportunity to become a distraction last year, and he didn't. His playing time took a big dip, as you talked about, only playing 25% of the snaps. But I really believe that if he's going to be a part-time player, if they can get anything of value for him, if Najee Good steps up or rookie Nate Gary steps up, if one of those reserve linebackers takes a big step forward during the preseason, I almost think you need to move on from Mychal Kendricks because I don't see many positive outcomes from him being here for 16 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Kendricks is I remember when, he first got here, he was like always around in the locker room, especially when LaShawn McCoy was here. Like their lockers were kind of close to each other. They're always joking around. He was always joking around with the linebackers. He was very vocal. He talked to the media a ton. At least when I first got on the beat, he was always talking to the media. And now, I mean, the fact that Kendricks talked today after talking yesterday, is shocking to me. I mean, last year you would try to get him in the locker room, and I'd be like, hey, Mike, you have 2 seconds. And he's like, oh, I got to go do this. And he would never return. Or, oh, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. And then he wouldn't.
Yep.
And I'm not even saying that in a bad way against him. Like, I'm not a media member complaining about access. I'm saying it's just, to me, the noticeable difference in his attitude. And he hasn't been a distraction, but to me, he doesn't seem like somebody that's happy to be here. I think he likes his teammates. I think he likes the area, but he doesn't play. I mean, he's never on the field, basically.
Right.
And it's not even, and to go back to what I asked you, yes, part of it, I agree, a big part of it is the 4-3. I also just don't think this coaching staff is as big on him. Now, it's interesting, he said the thing about the GM, or whoever he talked to, saying we don't trade talented young guys away. Well, the Eagles would have traded him if they got an offer they liked for him. So,
right, and there just weren't any offers to be had. And
yeah.
Kendricks talked about that today, and there have been reports throughout the offseason that he's been on the block. So I'm not surprised that it's come to this, and I think that maybe part of him being more accessible this spring and summer might have to do with not necessarily him creating a distraction, but it could be him laying the groundwork for a campaign to potentially talk his way out of town.
Yeah, I mean, next offseason, I think he will be with the team this season for a number of reasons. One, their depth at linebacker is not good.
No question.
They might not be very high on Kendricks, but the linebackers outside of your top 3, if you include Kendricks, Najee Good, who's a good special teams player. I'm not sure that's a guy you want out there if something should happen to Hicks or Bradham. And let's be honest, Hicks, he is injury prone. So, I mean, there's no guarantee he's going to play 16 games, even though he did last year. Nate Gary, who you talked about, he was a safety in college.
Yep.
You can't really feel
He's a rookie.
Really good about him. Joe Walker, a guy they're high on. Almost, but he spent
more of a middle linebacker.
Yeah,
too.
and also spent all last year on the injured reserve. Then you have Don Cherry, a guy who, was on the practice squad last year, local guy out of Villanova. He's on all their first team special teams. So I do think he has a good chance of making this roster. They like him. He can play all 3 positions. But again, he's not a guy, for no matter what the coaching staff thinks of Kendricks, you feel more comfortable with Kendricks out there than you do Gary. So for those reasons, I do think he's here. But also, let's talk about the cap ramifications. I mean, he has a $6.6 million cap hit for 2017. If they were to cut him, that number would increase. So, I mean, you would basically be paying more for him to be on the not to be on the roster than you would to have him on it. The other part of that, I mean, they could designate him a post-June 1st cut. At least I would assume they'd still be able to. They haven't used that designation yet. But even if they could, that's not something they do, because then you space that cap hit out after 2 seasons. And I honestly, I don't think this isn't a situation where you have to do something. I think if he's here, he'll be the same guy he was last year. He won't talk much to the media. Probably be a little somber at times when you see him in the locker room, not seem like the normal Mychal Kendricks, but I don't think he's going to be a guy that, like today, even today when he talked, is anybody surprised he said he wanted out?
No,
I mean,
and I'm not saying that they need to release him tomorrow. I'm not saying they need to rush out and find a trade. But if Najee Good improves, if Nathan Gary is what they think that he is, and if they feel like these guys are good enough to fill the void as the number 3 linebacker, the number 1 backup linebacker, then I think that you're doing everybody a favor by trading him. But I'm not saying that it has to be priority 1. I just think that after everything that went down last year, a diminished role this year, even further from where he was a year ago, I just don't. I can't guarantee that Mychal Kendricks won't be a distraction under those circumstances.
All right, so I'm going to tell you, if they were to trade Kendricks, and let me see if this would change your opinion. And if they trade Kendricks, you have $4.8 million in dead money, and you save $1.8. So I guess in that way, you're opening up almost $2 million of cap space. Under any circumstance, it seems like he's going to count 4.8 against the cap.
Yep.
So the question is, if you do trade him, do you basically just trade him for whatever you can get? I mean, assuming you see what you like, assuming what you said, you see good things out of your backups, or is this a guy you want to keep around, or is that $2 million in cap space just simply worth whatever you can get?
I think the cap space is important, particularly because of all of the one-year deals that you have that you're going to have to make some decisions on with some veteran guys who might play their way into some pretty big deals this offseason. But I also think that if you look around this roster and you look at the whole at cornerback, Kendricks might be the type of player that you might be able to swap garbage for garbage. You might be able to swap a Dennis Kelly for a Dorial Green Beckham. You might have to make that kind of a deal. Kyle Fuller's the perfect name to throw out there with the Bears. They could use a linebacker. Kendricks seems to fit the type of defense that they run. you could package a draft pick and Kendricks to bring in Kyle Fuller for a look-see, and I think that Kyle Fuller would have more value to this particular team and this particular defense than Mychal Kendricks does.
All right, so moving on from Kendricks, because at this point, I think moving on is the best thing we can say about it, because one, I think at this point that there's nothing that's really going to happen, in my opinion. I don't think him saying that today is going to influence the front office to do anything. I don't think it's going to influence their team to make a trade for him. I think that if another play goes down in camp, maybe, teams, and there was a report that they talked to the 49ers, maybe if the 49ers lose a linebacker, then that's something that the Eagles would explore. But in my opinion, this, we'll talk about it today, and it's certainly interesting. I never thought he'd even still be here, but I wouldn't be surprised if, this kind of goes away now that he's kind of voiced his opinion. So speaking of going away, last podcast, and this just speaks to the type of team we're covering here, while we're recording, they released Marcus Smith. So we didn't get a chance to talk about it. Let's talk about that briefly at least. The team just finally lets go Marcus Smith. The timing, they did it probably because he was going to be able to roster bonus in a few days, and he's had trouble staying healthy, so they probably did not want to risk bringing him out onto the field and him potentially doing that. But Marcus Smith, I know he's a guy you talked to a ton when he was here. When you look back, do you blame him? Do you blame the coaching staff, the front office? How do you think the blame of him not working out kind of gets distributed?
Well, I think part of it, and a significant portion of it, has to fall on Marcus Smith. You're a first-round pick, and even though that's higher than a lot of analysts would have projected that you get picked, you have to step in, you have to step up. And in all of my interactions with Marcus Smith, he never really came across as that overly confident guy, never seemed to quite grasp the responsibilities of the system. They didn't do any favors for him, putting him at a position where he needed to both rush the passer and have coverage responsibilities as a linebacker. But I think first and foremost falls on Marcus Smith, falls on the Eagles for overvaluing him, and in a lot of ways it falls on Chip Kelly and Bill Davis for not playing him the requisite number of snaps both in practice and in the games with the first team to even see what you have. And I do find it interesting that the day after he clears waivers, Eliot, the Seahawks sign him.
Right.
And they sign him to a 3-year deal worth $18 million. And I know the the 3 years is kind of
$18 million. I haven't seen that.
I've seen that. And a couple other players around the locker room were talking about the $18 million numbers. So they see something in Marcus Smith. And again, I don't really know what they've seen, but if there's any system where he can walk in, shed that label of being a first-round bust, not feel like he has to be the man, it's right there around all of those quality defensive linemen. And listen, I wish the kid the best, and I'm going to be really interested to see how this plays out with him in Seattle.
And the interesting thing to me if I think about why Marcus Smith failed, two reasons. One, I think he wasn't a guy that when they picked him, everyone in that room was behind the pick.
Right.
It was either Chip or Howie. I've heard that Howie had a lot more to do to the pick. You can talk to people that heard it's been a lot more of Chip.
I've heard the Chip, and that just speaks to the room.
Exactly. It speaks to, right, exactly. So I think that, first of all, he came into a situation where he wasn't completely, not wanted, but the entire organization wasn't completely behind him. And then I thought the big mistake they made with Marcus Smith was he gets here. He is perfect for a 3-4 outside linebacker, in my opinion. He's at least in Louisville, he showed the ability to, drop into coverage if he needed to. Very athletic, long. He has the physical tools. But they bring him in here. They put him back when they ran to 3-4 at the jack position. And the jack position in Billy Davis's 3-4 defense was basically, he was a linebacker, but it was Connor Barwin's position. And
Jack of all trades.
Exactly. And Barwin's one of the smarter football players I've been around, at least my time covering the team. So that position requires a ton of thinking. It's a position where you have to read what the offense is doing and then know whether you're going to drop back. Are you going to rush? Are you going to cover this guy? What are you going to do? And they put Smith in that position to start, at least in OTAs and then the beginning of training camp. And I thought that was a bad decision because here's a rookie that's coming in. I think Smith is a guy that was drafted for his athletic potential. I wouldn't say his football acumen was elite, at least initially. So I think
he was drafted to get after the quarterback.
Right, exactly. So you bring him in and you put him in that position, and I really think it put him behind the 8 ball to start. He's out there, he's confused. I just didn't think that was the right thing. So that kind of started his career off on a bad note. And then when he played, he didn't play that well. So then we have the pressure, and Brandon Graham has talked about it, the pressure of being a first-round pick and not doing well initially. And you get that bust label. After 1 year, Marcus Smith was being talked about as a huge bust. Then last year, he doesn't play well again. He ends up with 4 sacks or 4.5 sacks in 37 games. And the majority of those games he was played in, it was more just because of special teams. He really didn't, appear on the defense a ton. So, I think defensive line is a position where you kind of need some reps to get going, as you mentioned.
Yep.
So I think it's just a combination of things. Not letting Marcus Smith off the hook, though. I mean, not coming to voluntary OTAs. That just is not a good look for him, especially given his status on the team. Now, maybe he's already tried and forced his way out at that point. But I never got the feeling being around him. Personalities for each player is different. You don't want to grade a guy completely off his personality. Sidney Jones, a guy
coming from the creator of franchise
coming
swag,
from the creator of franchise
right?
swag. Well, I guess that's true. But I guess what I'm saying is this. What I'm saying is Sidney Jones is a guy, he hasn't talked a lot. But when you're around him, he seems to be very quiet. But everything you hear about him from Washington was he was that leader of the team. He was very fiery. Seems very quiet so far. Marcus Smith was a guy, when you were around him, you never got that sense of extreme passion for the game or anything like that.
Right.
And I think that played a small role in it.
And today, Jim Schwartz on Friday after practice during his press conference basically came out and said that for Marcus Smith, and I don't know how much stock I put into this, I think it's just a coach not trying to trash a player on his way out the door, but Jim Schwartz basically said that the reason Marcus Smith isn't here is because we made a lot of moves at defensive end. We went out and we signed Chris Long. We went out and we drafted Derek Barnett in the first round. We're confident in Alex McAllister and some of the other young players that we have here, and it was going to be a numbers game to get Marcus Smith snaps during training camp and during the preseason. So in a way, I get it, but the other part of that equation is you don't make those moves
right, exactly.
if you're happy with Marcus Smith.
Right.
And we talked about this after the draft. We talked about this during OTAs, that a lot of the reason, at least in my opinion, and I think that you have talked about this as well, Eliot, a lot of the reason why they drafted Derek Barnett is they were admitting that they made a mistake with Marcus Smith, and they were fixing that mistake. And I think Derek Barnett has the chance to be a heck of a football player. I think he's going to, play meaningful snaps immediately as a rookie, and Marcus Smith just was never going to be that guy here.
Yep, I agree. So, I mean, ever since he's been cut, they've been debating biggest draft bust ever. Where does he rank? Clearly, he's got to be up there. I mean, 4 sacks in 37 games, never got it going. So, I mean, you mentioned Barnett, and he's got to clearly that's got to be a better pick than Smith. But the Barnett pick, again, puts that pressure on Howie and Joe Douglas, especially coming off of the Marcus Smith pick. I mean, we can debate who wanted him more, Chip or Howie or whatever. Howie was the GM when that pick was made. So now you're talking about Marcus Smith as a first-round bust, Danny Watkins as a first-round bust. I mean, Howie really, his first-round, his resume for first-round picks is not great. So this Derek Barnett pick is really one that needs to work out. So moving on from Marcus Smith, much like the Eagles did, I just wanted to briefly talk about Jordan Matthews because we talked about him a lot on the last podcast. And since then, he's come out. He's practiced. He practiced yesterday on Thursday, full go. It was a light practice. And then on Friday, which was the most physical practice at training camp so far, he was a full go. He was out there. He looked healthy. Yesterday in the locker room, he told me afterwards that his knee felt good after that workout on Thursday, which for injuries is huge because during the actual practice, the pain isn't there as much, but it's afterwards, the swelling. How do you react? So the fact that he was able to practice Thursday and Friday was very big. What have you seen from Jordan Matthews so far, and what was your reaction to what he had to say when he did speak to the media?
I thought he's looked great so far, and again, I take nothing out of yesterday other than the fact that he came through it healthy and
that's
he practiced
a big deal,
on Friday.
though. I mean, he was able to run those type of things.
I'm just saying that when you look at the way that a 10-10-10 practice is set up, it's all predetermined and you're working on certain situations and all of that. But Friday's practice, there was one play in particular where he lined up in the slot. I believe it was either Patrick Robinson or Rasul Douglas who was above him. And he basically double moved him, made a catch, and as Jordan always does, he ran it 20 yards after the catch during that drill. And I thought, you know what? That's the type of player who's healthy. That's the type of player who's motivated. And he spoke at great length to a group of us right after practice on Thursday. And he basically took umbrage with the assertion that part of him being absent or limited during the spring was because of his contract and this being the final year of his rookie deal and the Eagles not looking to extend him. And he said, listen, I've never played this game for money. I've played it for respect. I go over the middle and fight for every pass, not because I'm looking for that big deal, but because of the fact that I want the guy opposite to respect me. And I really do take a lot of that at face value for Jordan Matthews. That's just the type of guy that he is. He's never had to be the guy that, brings the rest of his family up behind him because of his big NFL contract. And I think that if he's healthy enough to play, he's going to play. And I still believe from an Eagles standpoint that if Nelson Aguilar builds on his strong spring, has a strong camp, looks good in preseason, that if they can get something for Jordan Matthews, they'd probably seriously consider trading him. But I think that from him, he looks healthy. He looks ready to go. He's said multiple times that even when the pads go on and it's full tackling, there are no limitations. Mm-hmm. So I'd expect when the pads go on and they start hitting on Tuesday, I think he'll be out there, and I think that he'll be the Jordan Matthews that we've seen over the last couple of years.
You know, another thing that he said was he was asked about a report. It was written on Philly.com, and the report basically said some players in the locker room think that the injury is worse than knee tendonitis, and some people in the building, speaking of the NovaCare, feel that he could probably be able to practice more, but this has to do with his contract. And he was asked about that, and that's kind of what what you said, how he reacted to that in terms of, no, I would never do that. I'm just here to play. To me, that report, and I'm not doubting it at all. I like the work Philly.com does. I'm not doubting it. But to me, the fact that that was a report, and there is people in the NovaCare saying that, just speaks to the fact that I don't think he's going to be back in 2018.
Agreed.
I mean, those type of reports don't come out. Notice you never really hear negative reports come out of the NovaCare about Carson Wentz or guys that that this team views as a long-term option for the team.
And you can look no further than the fact that here we're on the verge of August 1st, and there have been no talks about extending him. And the Eagles traditionally, if they've drafted somebody or if there's a young player that they like on their roster, they lock those guys up before they get to their contract year. So I'm with you, Eliot, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he's not here in 2018. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Eagles, because of Nelson Aguilar or some other wide receiver really stepping up, I wouldn't be surprised if they trade him before this season even begins.
And man, like the thing that I've thought just watching him these past 2 days is on the last podcast we debated who would you want to commit big money to, Alshon or Jordan Matthews, and we disagreed on that. But the reality is they don't got to decide right now. And with both those guys out there, like you can really see how this offense could be special because Jordan Matthews, he's not an outside receiver, which is going to impact his value and probably has to do with something about the fact of the Eagles not re-signing him yet. But, man, he might be one of the best slot receivers in the league. And when you have him in that slot and Alshon on the outside, and we'll talk about it in a minute, how Alshon and Torrey looked on Friday, but he really is in a position to thrive and to have a good season. And he will get that big deal next offseason if he can stay healthy. But if the offense is really good this year, Jordan, puts up big numbers, Alshon does, this team wins 10 games, I'll just be interested to see then how the Eagles react because Jordan Matthews is A locker room favorite, B, a fan favorite, and C, most importantly, C, Carson Wentz favorite. But finally, he's a guy that if he can help his team go, you're not going to just let him want to walk. And I do think that if the Eagles offered him a deal and another team offered him a deal similar with more money, but it was similar, he just strikes me as the kind of guy that would want to stay here. He likes his teammates. He likes the area. He likes the idea of building it with Wentz. And, I know every player says they don't care about the money. But with Matthews, I really feel like if you're telling Jordan Matthews he can make $10 million and stay here or he can make 14 and go play in Cincinnati, I really honestly do think he would take the 10.
Maybe, but that offer still has to be there.
I
think that if all things
but
are
I'm saying
equal,
if he plays well, they might have no choice but to make him that offer. Well, I shouldn't say they can do whatever they want.
I think that they're going to, and again, we've debated Alshon Jeffrey versus Jordan Matthews. You know how I feel about Alshon.
Yep.
But if it comes down to them at the end of the year, whether they're going to potentially lose Alshon Jeffrey over $1 million or $2 million, or they make an offer to Jordan Matthews to keep him, I think they're going to go all in on Alshon Jeffrey, assuming that Jeffrey doesn't get hurt, doesn't have a PED suspension, and doesn't catch 50 passes for 600 yards.
And let's be real. As everything I just said about Jordan with the money, that is not going to apply to Alshon. Alshon is a guy that's going to take the biggest deal, and I'm not knocking him for that. Every player has their priorities. He's a guy that's played on one-year deals now 3 years in a row, I believe, if you include the franchise tag as a one-year deal. So he's a guy that's going to want that big payday. And I'm not knocking him, but he does not. If the Eagles offer him $10 million and the Minnesota Vikings offer him $12 million, he'll be in Minnesota.
As he should.
Right.
And I just look at, and we've talked about this, what we saw from him in the spring, what we've seen from him today, what Carson Wentz has talked about in terms of his hand strength and his ridiculous catch radius. Mm-hmm. You're already seeing Alshon Jeffrey and the impact he has on this offense.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to talk about next with the receivers. So let's talk about Friday's practice, because to me the big takeaway was you're already, just like you said, you're already seeing the impact these receivers could have on the offense and Carson Wentz because of the catches they can make that last year nobody on this team could.
No, I agree. And ironically, it was a catch that Alshon Jeffrey didn't make that jumped out at me today. It was a ball that Carson Wentz overthrew. It was over his head along the sidelines. I think it might have been either C.J. Smith or Aaron Grimes covering Alshon Jeffrey. And he goes up and very nearly made that one-handed catch on a ball that nobody comes close to last year. If it goes 5 feet over the head of Odell Beckham Jr. or Josh Huff doesn't even give a complete effort on it, and Alshon very nearly hauled that thing in, and I just said, man, this guy's catch radius is outrageous. He caught a ball today one-on-one against Rasul Douglas where he was diving to the ground, picked it up off the dirt. He made a catch in stride. He made a catch leaping through the air, and I just think that you look at him, you look at Torrey Smith on a play today where Jalen Mills did everything but decapitate him at the line of scrimmage, blows by him along the sideline, makes the catch, turns it upfield for a big gain, and you just close your eyes and you start to think, okay, in this season that is so much more about the development of Carson Wentz even than it is about wins and losses, if these guys play at this level, then the Eagles' mission has been accomplished because they're just going to help Wentz develop and they're going to have huge dividends on the rest of this offense.
And the thing about Alshon is, I think at least I know, reading my Twitter mentions, there's a persona out there that I'm anti-Alshon. But I'm not anti-Alshon. I mean, I think he's the 14th, entering the season, the 14th or 15th best receiver in the league, which is saying something. I mean, there's only a handful of number one guys out there. But to me, my biggest thing with Alshon was I just want to see it. I want to see him do it because the last 2 years, and I know his quarterback play wasn't great, he's only been a dominant number one out of 5 years. If he's that dominant number one this year, I'll be the first to admit, not that I was wrong, but I'll be the first to admit that this guy is better than 14th or 15th. He has the physical tools to do it. It's just he hasn't the past 2 years. And so that's why,
listen, the last 2 years he caught 800 and 821 yards, but prior to that he had back-to-back years, 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns, 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns, 90 catches in 2013. So, again, last year we can point to the decline because of the PED suspension. That doesn't help. That's going to hurt your numbers.
The injuries.
But 820 yards in 12 games.
Right.
With subpar quarterback play and in an offense that really couldn't get going, I have a hard time sitting here and saying that he wasn't that true number one.
And the Bears let him walk with tons of cap space.
Sure, and that's part of it. But you put him in this situation with the amount of wide receiver and tight end talent around him, with behind that offensive line and with Carson Wentz throwing him the football, I just think you're going to get a guy who's much closer to that 1,100 to 1,300 yard receiver than somebody who, for the first time in his career, isn't going to catch 800 yards.
Yeah, and I mean, look, today, I guess what I'm trying to say is today was the first day where I really saw what Alshon could bring to this team. I mean, you mentioned it, the catches he makes, the chemistry he seems to be developing with Wentz. So definitely a good day for Alshon. But the other guy that I thought had a very good day, maybe a better day than Alshon, but if not, very close, Torrey Smith.
Yep.
Huge day. I mean, 2 plays. He had one play where there's no tackling, but he caught the ball in a short gain, and Jalen Mills came up and was pretty physical with him. And I think even if the pads were on and there was hitting, he would have broken that tackle, and he went down the field for what would probably have been a touchdown. So that was a play not a lot of receivers make last year. But the other one he made was it was a quick slant route. He's going across the middle. Carson Wentz throws him the ball. It's probably a yard or two behind Smith. So not a good throw by Wentz. But you saw Smith reach back, grab the ball, pull it in, and continue to go. Yep. And, for all the talks about Carson's accuracy issues last year, which I think were overblown, but that, this year he gets 10 or 15 of those catches made that he didn't last year, and all of a sudden we're not talking about accuracy issues with him. So you really saw how, with Alshon's catch radius, absolutely, but in general, I think Wentz is not going to have to be as accurate as he did in the past. Now, look, Torrey Smith had an issue with drops last year, and there's just one catch. So I got to see it with him, too, in the regular season. But today, with Alshon playing great and Torrey playing great, which probably doesn't speak well for the Eagles' cornerbacks, but with both those guys playing great, you really saw how Wentz is not going to have to be, running around behind the line of scrimmage for 10 seconds, putting a perfect pass. There's going to be a bigger margin of error for him.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to, we did a podcast right after free agency where we debated whether or not the Eagles did enough, and I think that what they did this offseason, whether they intend to bring Alshon back or not, and whatever happens with Torrey Smith, they made a concerted effort to get better, more proven veteran wide receivers around Carson Wentz so that he can have that bigger margin for error, so that he can develop some good habits, so he can continue to develop not only his confidence but also his passing mechanics and his throwing motion. And whether those guys are back here or not, they're going to be better suited next year because Carson Wentz will have had this season with those weapons to further develop his game. And that's why I think that this year is even more important to see Carson Wentz develop than it is their win-loss record.
Absolutely. All right. So Friday was the first real practice. On Saturday, they're going to go to the link. They always seem a little lighter, but Saturday, I believe the pads do go on.
Yep.
So that'll be very interesting. Rain, we'll see what happens with it, but Saturday they're going to practice. Sunday they're going to practice. So then they'll have their first day off Monday. So if you're a rookie, you will have practiced 7 straight days at that point. So the camp is definitely getting off to a bit of definitely a physical start with Doug. So before we get out of here, let's take some time, as we always do, for some of your Twitter questions. The first one I have is from at Hawkmeister32, and this is actually one of my observations from today, so I'm happy he asked this. Who wins the second cornerback spot, Rasul Douglas or Patrick Robinson? And my answer to that is I think Patrick Robinson starts week 1, but if Patrick Robinson plays during training camp preseason like he did today, my answer could change because today he did not have a good day. Undrafted rookie last year, quarterback turned receiver David Watford beat Robinson down the field for probably about a 40 or 45-yard touchdown. He had a step or two on him. Robinson was, barely there when the ball got there. So not a good play for Robinson. I don't think he's played very well so far. Rasul Douglas has looked good, but again, third-round pick that was really fourth round when you take into the fact he was a compensatory pick. I'm hesitant about rushing him out onto the field. What do you think in that?
I think that they're better served by having Rasul Douglas out there and giving him this year to develop and take those snaps, but there's a caveat there. And the caveat is he needs to be as good or better than Patrick Robinson.
Which is not much.
He needs to win that job. Yeah. And unfortunately today we saw a double move. I believe it was Marcus Johnson who pulled it off on Patrick Robinson, beat him at the line of scrimmage, and it was almost Otis McKelvin-like, and which is kind of scary when you think back to how many times McKelvin got beat by a double move. But if it comes down to those two players are equal, I think you got to throw Rasul Douglas out there and let him develop. But he's been inconsistent. He was inconsistent during minicamp. He's had some nice plays during training camp. If I had to hedge my bets, I think Patrick Robinson starts week 1.
And the thing about Rasul is, you saying that he struggled on the line of scrimmage, that was a huge thing for him coming into the season because he played a lot of off coverage at West Virginia. Not the fastest guy in the world. The Eagles like to put their corners up on the line of scrimmage. So him struggling there is definitely an issue. All right, what's the second question we have?
Second questions. How do the wide receivers and running backs look so far? Any surprises? That's from @CMS_21. I look at Donnell Pumphrey as one of the bigger surprises. And I know that we figured that he was going to play into getting onto the field as a rookie, maybe as a wide receiver. But the one thing they've done a lot this camp is, and we saw it a lot on Friday, almost every other play, it seemed like they were hitting him with a pass on a screen pass or on a wheel route out of the backfield. And they seem to really like this pony package where they have Darren Sproles and Donnell Pumphrey on the field at the same time. So if there's anybody that's really surprised me, it's the impact Donnell Pumphrey is already having on this offense.
To me, one of the surprises is, and I don't even know really if he constitutes as a surprise anymore with as much people talk about him, but Marcus Johnson is a backup on this team. And I say that because he's not a third-string backup, fourth-string backup. When the Eagles have their first-team receivers out there, it's Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith. When they have their second-team receivers, it's Marcus Johnson and Nelson Aguilar on the outside. So he is certainly moving his way up the depth chart. They like him a lot. He's played well. He had a bad drop. It was either Tuesday or Wednesday in the red zone, but had a bad drop in the red zone. Should have been a touchdown, but he had a few nice catches today. He's a guy that I think has a legitimate chance to make this team if they keep 6 receivers. All right, the next question we have is from @FootballKelly. I think 4 tight ends on the 53-man roster. What do you think?
That means that you're going to end up keeping Selleck, Burton, Ertz, and
I guess it'd be Brad. Well, to me, the player would be Billy Brown, undrafted guy. He's played really well. The other option would be Anthony Denham. And then the tight end situation is interesting because you have Ertz, who's clearly your long-term guy. Selleck is probably not back in 2018.
Burton's on a contract year.
And Burton's on a contract year, but also is he a guy that you really see as a long-term number 2 tight end in terms of his size, and can he really play that position? I'm not convinced. I'm not, and that's not knocking Burton. I think he's more of a Swiss Army knife type guy. Where today he lined up as a fullback. I mean, I think he can do a lot of things, but I'm not sure he's he's not Billy Brown. Billy Brown the undrafted tight end. He's big, he's long, he's caught everything thrown his way. So I can see the argument for keeping an extra tight end. That being said, I don't think they keep 4 tight ends.
I don't think 4 make the roster, and I
No.
think that Billy Brown, because he plays tight end, I think that's a position that you can sneak onto the practice squad. And if it doesn't work out with Trey Burton this year, or you don't view him as that long-term solution as your number 3 tight end, then you bring Brown onto the active roster next year. But 4 tight ends, you start talking about keeping maybe 6 wide receivers. Are you going to keep Marcus Johnson, or are you going to keep an extra tight end in Billy Brown? Are you going to keep the extra corner, or are you going to keep a 4th tight end? And I just have a hard time justifying 4 tight ends on this roster, particularly with so much depth already at wide receiver.
All right. So, do you have another Twitter question?
You're going to have to get another one because my phone just died. So
training camp problems. So we're good on that. We got some Twitter questions in. Kendricks, Marcus Smith, Jordan Matthews. This camp is never boring. So, all right, guys, today is Friday. The Eagles, like I said, practice Saturday, Sunday, off Monday for the first time. And then Tuesday, from what we're hearing, that is going to be the first day with actual hitting. So we'll have a ton to talk about when we're back on Tuesday. We'll have 3 practices, and who knows who else will have asked to be traded by then. So we'll be back on Tuesday. As always, as I said at the beginning, go subscribe to us. iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spreaker. We're on all those platforms. When you do subscribe, make sure you leave us a review and a rating. We would really appreciate it. So, Matt, I will talk to you on Tuesday.
Sounds good.